Okay, we might as well get started. My name is Patrice Hamilton, and I teach communication and English here at Tunxis Community College. And I'd like to welcome our panelists who are former Tunxis students, and they're here to talk about life after Tunxis. You know, I know as students, sometimes it must seem kind of like, oh my God, what a long haul it is to go to school, especially if you go to school part-time. Sometimes it must seem like it takes forever. And so one of the reasons that we wanted to organize this event is just to kind of encourage you that there's light at the end of the tunnel, that there's jobs waiting for you and there's success waiting for you. And so these students want to kind of talk about that with you. So let me just introduce them. The man to the far right is Chandler Hartford. Chandler Hartford earned his associates in 2011 and a bachelor's in communication in 2015. While obtaining his bachelor's, he worked for a temp agency and was placed at Medtronic, Inc. He was hired full-time after 3 months and received numerous promotions, leading up to his current role as quality engineer. He is currently working on a master's in industrial psychology and pursuing a professional career in public speaking. So this is Chandler Hartford. Our next panelist is Beau Anderson, and Beau earned his associate's degree in general studies from Tunxis in 2007, his Bachelor of Arts in Government from Wesleyan University in 2009, and dual master's degrees in Public Administration and Survey Research at UConn. He currently works for the Connecticut Department of Housing. So this is Beau Anderson. Next is Sami Jensen. Sami graduated with an associate's degree in general studies from Tunxis in 2009. She currently works as a graphic designer at Timex, but also got her bachelor's in communication at UConn. On the side, she also is an entrepreneur and owns and operates a small business crafting handmade natural beauty products, which she sells online and in small Connecticut boutiques. And I have to tell you, I've sampled her beauty products and they're awesome. So this is Sami Jensen. Next is Anuj Bawa. Anuj graduated with an associate's in business administration. He works in a jewelry store, and he worked at a jewelry store and rose from the ranks of sales associate to store manager. He earned a diploma in graduate diamond and colored stones, and has recently opened his own business in Planceville, Connecticut. So this is Anuj Bawa. Lastly, Ryan Rogers enrolled at Tunxis in the spring of 2006 with a focus in general studies, and he moved on to CCSU and graduated. The mics at Tunxis. Always a story. And he graduated with a BA in political science. He worked as a sales consultant at the Hartford and a claims adjuster at Allstate before being accepted to Quinnipiac's law school. He is soon to be named the Democratic nominee. Oh, maybe you should share. Sharing is caring.
Give her some, please.
Just give your sister a yeah. Getting back to Ryan Rogers, he is the Democratic nominee for the 16th District State Senate seat, and which will be representing Southington, Prospect, Wolcott, and parts of Cheshire and Waterbury. I live in Southington, so I'll be very interested to hear what you have to say. All right, so these are our candidates. And I thought we might I know. All right, I'm going to
Low power.
Yeah. I turned it off. All right, so what I'd like to do right now, until we get the microphones worked out, is just start with Chandler and have him just kind of tell you a little bit more about his experiences post-Tunxis, some of the challenges he faced, as well as some of the successes. So, Chandler, do it.
Speakers working? No.
I turned them down for now. Why don't you just press?
Okay, that's okay.
See if you know.
So, all right. So basically, all right. So my story is I started Tunxis. How's that? Yeah, much better.
We'll give it a shot.
Okay. So my story is I started Tunxis right out of high school in 2006. And when Patrice Hamilton spoke of the long road and the light at the end of the tunnel, I could definitely relate to that, probably more so than anyone here. And the reason is because it took me almost 6 years to complete my associate's degree. I was the student who really had no idea what he wanted to do. I had pretty much no ambition. I was the student who would come into class late and immediately look for a spot at the back of the room. I was the student who would often skip class. I was a student who would get horrible grades on most of his tests, and when the teacher would hand back the test, I could still remember just taking it and quickly putting it in my bag because I knew it was going to be like a 20 or something totally humiliating. I was put on academic probation numerous times. I withdrew from many of my classes numerous times, and eventually I dropped out. This was probably my second or third year of college. So basically what happened after that is I just kind of started to rethink everything. I remember just being at a really low point in my life. I had no job, no money, no education. Most of my friends were starting to get their bachelor's degrees, get really good jobs, buy houses and things like that. And I just felt like, wow, I really need to do something. So I started reading motivational books, books on like success philosophy and things like that. And long story short, I was just able to totally change my mindset. I went from being someone who had no motivation to probably the most ambitious person you could ever meet. People were just like, wow, like this guy is crazy. He's constantly reading, he's constantly going to class, he wants to do so much. And I credit a lot of that to the books I read, but I credit also a lot to my friends and family and people like that. So long story short, I don't want to go too long. I received my associate's degree finally in 2011. I immediately went for my bachelor's degree at CCSU, completed that 2 years later, and worked full-time at a medical device company called Medtronic, where I was able to work my way up into numerous positions of increasing responsibility, and now I'm currently a quality engineer and going for my master's degree while also pursuing a speaking career part-time. So that's pretty much my story. I wanted to come back just because I know there's a lot of students at community colleges who are pretty much exactly the same as I was, and I know their mindset, and I'm just basically here to give you some of my insight on how I was able to turn my mindset around and was able to use the books I read and the techniques in the books that I read to just kind of develop that ambition and that vision to carry on forward. So that's basically my story. Thank you.
I guess it's my turn. So hi everybody, I'm Beau Anderson. I graduated from Tunxis in 2007. As Professor Hamilton said, that's maybe the weirdest thing about being back here is that I'm not sure if I'm supposed to call her professor or not still. I guess a little bit about my story. So I started at Tunxis in the fall of 2005, and I was a non-traditional student, sort of by definition at the time, because I didn't come to college straight out of high school. I think I was 24 at the time when I started college. So I took a couple years off, thought that maybe I could make it if I stuck at my job in the video rental store. So if I stayed on that path, I would be inside a red box right now alphabetizing DVDs. Blu-rays, not even DVDs. Anyway, so that I realized that, for myself, I had some of the same sort of frustrations, with friends and other people. My peers were graduating college. I hadn't even started yet, and I didn't know where to start myself. I knew that if I wanted more in my life, that the only way I was going to get there is if I went back to school. And at the time I was living in New Britain, so I found Tunxis Community College was the closest, and I started here, full-time. I actually started in a developmental, I'm not sure if it's called developmental, but it was non-credit algebra class. So that was one of the first classes that I had here, in addition to sort of full-time. So I started a little bit behind and had to sort of make up some credits in order to graduate on time. But I was able to finish in 2 years. And my original plan was, got to go to Tunxis, I'll get my associates, I'll transfer to a 4-year school, and then we'll see about law school and see what I can do. And then by the time I left Tunxis, I decided that law school probably was not for me, and instead of just transferring to a school that I hadn't even thought of what options might be available, I was accepted to Trinity College and Wesleyan University, and I selected Wesleyan in Middletown, and went there to major in government, because that's what they call political science. And what my experience with them was, they took a lot of my credits. Actually, they took all the credits that I had from Tunxis, and but because I didn't start off with sort of thinking ahead as far as transferring and what classes might transfer and why, they actually devalued many of my credits, or put them in sort of free elective status. So when I left, even though I'd taken Intro to Political Science and some of those basic classes, I had to sort of retake those at my next school. So a little bit of advice, I think, is to think ahead. If you're planning to transfer, or if you think that might be an option for you, to sort of think about what schools you might want to go to and what classes might transfer with you, could save you some time down the road. And then by the time I finished at Wesleyan, all of my plans had changed again, and because I expected to just graduate and I was going to go to work, but that was in 2009, which was not the best time to graduate with a bachelor's degree and to go find a job. And so I went to grad school to hide from reality for a little bit longer at the University of Connecticut in West Hartford, and pursued a public administration master's degree and also a survey research master's degree. And when I graduated in 2011, my first job was in market research at a firm in Waterbury called UGov. They do market research for big companies like Coca-Cola and companies you've never heard of like Pennington, that do grass seed, that are not Scott's grass seed. So we do some research for them, and after a couple of years, I thought, well, every project I'm working on has become an emergency. I'm always working late. Every time I come home, I have dinner, kids go to sleep, my laptop comes on, and I'm back at work until I go to bed and then get up the next morning. I thought I needed something different. So I switched from for-profit sector into the nonprofit sector at United Way of Connecticut, 211 in Rocky Hill. And after 2 years there, an opportunity opened up at the State of Connecticut Department of Housing, where they are hoping to end homelessness, or chronic homelessness, by the end of 2016. And so I applied for that job and started in January of this year. And so time's wasted, and I've got, when I'm done here, I got to get back to work because we have to do everything we can statewide to end chronic homelessness by the end of this year. So.
Hi, I'm Sami. So like Patrice said, I graduated in 2009. I've been calling her Patrice because we're kind of like buddies outside of Tunxis.
I should call one.
I actually, so first I want to definitely second what Beau said about transferring. That was one thing that I know was kind of hell for me too, was trying to figure out how to transfer my credits. I ended up going to UConn after Tunxis, but I'll back up a little bit. I graduated New Britain High School in 2005, and for pretty much my entire life, I wanted to move to LA and become an actress. That's all I wanted to do. And after my junior year of high school, I went out to LA. I have an uncle who lives there, And we looked at colleges, and I was like so starry-eyed, and I came home with all these applications, and I was ready to do it, and my dad said, yeah, that's not gonna happen. We just don't have the money for that. So I was really bummed out, and after I graduated high school, I just really had no motivation, which is not something that I'm used to because I'm a very motivated person. And I was like, well, I really want to take a year off after high school and just sort of like reset and figure out what I want to do. And he wouldn't let me. He kind of forced me to go to CCSU, and I tried to do their theater program there, and I hated it, and I was just like totally not into being in school at that point. So I dropped out after a couple of weeks. I think it was actually right after I couldn't get my money back is when I decided to drop out. So yes, good decisions. And then I, maybe like a couple of months later, I had taken a job at Stop and Shop working in the deli. Yes, I was a meat slicer, believe that or not. And it was not a fun job. And after a few months of doing that and not being in school, I kind of lost my mind and was like, I need to be back in school, and I just like needed my brain to be working. So I came to Texas, and I just kind of figured that while I was here, I would kind of figure out what I wanted to do. I knew that I could take. Oh wait. I knew that I could, kind of take some general credits and sort of see if anything really jived with me. And then I found Patrice's class. I think I started in one of your writing classes, one of your comp classes. And then I'm pretty sure I took every other class that you offered after that. Because Patrice and I had sort of similar life trajectories, and she kind of spoke to me about, Patrice had moved out to California for a while and talked to me about that, and I guess I sort of found almost like a soulmate, if that's not too gushy. And so she sort of talked to me a lot about what she did, and I became really passionate about the communications class that I took of Patrice's, because it allowed me to, I really like to talk, and like to be kind of like in the center of attention, hence wanting to be an actress. So I realized that communications was a lot of that as well. And I also took some art classes here and really enjoyed that. So when I moved on to UConn, I decided to finish my degree in communications. I figured that was a very general degree, but I was able to get some marketing background, as well as doing writing and public speaking and kind of like all things that I really liked to do, as well as like a little bit of design background. And then while I was finishing up my degree, I was working at Apple, and a woman came in and wanted to buy 2 iMacs, and it was like the biggest transaction that I had ever rung up. And I was like, oh, that's so weird. Why are you buying 2 iMacs? And she was like, well, I run a communications firm. And it was literally the day that I had declared communications as my major. So that was really weird. And she was like, oh, you should do an internship. So I was like, yeah, I should. And so I started there. I think it was an unpaid internship initially. It turned into a full-time job. I was there for 3 years. It was a small communications firm called Williams & House in Avon, and I don't think that they're around anymore, actually. And it was just awesome. So that's another thing that I would highly recommend if you can. Do an internship once you kind of figure out what you like to do, because I think that really helped me stand out among my peers who were also pursuing the same degree. So I did that. Eventually I was working pretty much full-time and going to school full-time, so my life was insane. But I don't have kids, so I was kind of really able to focus on that. Then I graduated, and 4 years ago I started at Timex, as I started there doing web content, so kind of in my field of communications, and then 2 years ago I transferred over to our in-house creative team, and I do graphic design now. So Another thing that I will definitely recommend, Patrice talked a little bit about how I have entrepreneurial endeavors as well. I make my own natural beauty products. Before that, I did a lot of blogging. Since I think 2009, I had a blog called Poor and Pretty, and it was just a lifestyle blog where I shared tutorials on like how to make different craft things and how to make natural beauty products and all of my wild and crazy outfits that I would wear. And when I went on interviews after working at the communications firm, I started going on interviews to kind of get like my next job. One of the things that I noticed that popped up a lot were, people that were interviewing me were saying, I love your blog, it's so cool that you do this. And, I had just sort of like put it on my resume to just have like something so that they could get to know me personally. But I found that having personal passion projects is another thing that really helps set you apart. So whether it has anything to do with the job that you're looking for or the major that you're pursuing, I mean, in our lifetimes, I think there's a statistic where we will change careers like 5 times in our adult life or something is about the average. So I think finding something that really grounds you and that you love, whether it's art, painting, or knitting, or making beauty products, or baking cupcakes, which is another thing that I like to do, or just sharing like crazy weird outfits that you wear, or singing, whatever it is, like find a way to have an outlet for that. And if you can, make it something that's public, that you share, that you can also show to employers, that I think is really important, because it also helps round you out as an individual and shows that you're really passionate about something other than just, whatever's on the paper in front of you, whatever the job is that you're applying for. So that's kind of all I have to say.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So, okay.
You can move it closer.
Okay, so I graduated high school with a 1.87 GPA. I think at some point before putting on my cap and gown, my dad looked at me and just simply asked me Air Force or Navy. I picked Air Force. So after I got back home, that's shortly after I decided to come to Tunxis. I was able to finish Tunxis with a 2.7, a little bit better. One of the biggest things that you can take away from this place, though, is it's going to give you a foundation in pretty much any degree that you want to get started in once you do transfer from here, if that's what you're looking to do. And besides that, one of the biggest, most important things about your whole experience in this building, there's many buildings now, is get involved in extracurricular. I mean, if there's not a club for something that you're interested in, find a way to start it. There's plenty of outlets here. I came and spoke to a class yesterday, and there was one younger man just working for the newspaper, taking pictures, and I think I'm going to talk to him afterwards. That kid is already gaining experience for probably what he has an interest in after this, So there's plenty of different clubs. I don't have the names of them off the top of my head. That's one of the biggest things I would stress about what you are doing here. And not just here, going beyond that, trying to make connections to teachers that share the same interests or in the same fields as you, and start building a network around what you might possibly want to do once you are done with school. After that, getting back to me a little bit, I left here and I went to CCSU, where I got a 3.2 by the time I was done, so it was a little bit better than 1.87 as well. I gained a BA in political science, like she mentioned before, but that BA isn't even the thing that helped me the most. It's just the connections I was able to make with some of the teachers and professors I did have there that have outside experience in the legislature, excuse me. Through them, I was able to meet other people. I was able to work as an intern for Congressman Larson. I was able to become a sessional in Hartford. So, I mean, if there's anything to take away from us up here, I don't feel me telling you my whole resume is going to help you guys one bit. I mean, just me telling you that this place helped me start, and I'm living proof that it doesn't matter where you start, actually. It's just how you finish. Just take it in stride. It might take you a little bit of time. It took me about 3 years just to get, I don't even think I got my associates in general studies. I think I just got enough credits to be able to transfer, and then start moving on and get into the career field that I wanted to get into. But I mean, that was generally the purpose of what we're looking to get at, right? So I'm sure if there's more we could talk about.
Okay, I'm gonna try this mic. So, you've mentioned things, I think I have bad luck with mics. I'm gonna try it farther away. So some of the things that you've mentioned, move away from that mic, that thing's haunted, is that it's a good idea to do something like have a blog or get involved in things that you're passionate about aside from what you're studying. Those are some things you guys mentioned. Is there anything else you could think of that students should do to prepare for that first big interview? Because I think most people sitting here have been on job interviews, but it's a little different when you're interviewing for that full-time position in your career. And so anybody got any advice about that? And then I'm gonna shut off this mic.
Anybody feels like answering? Okay, Chandler.
I'd say for me, what I've found works the best for interviews is to not just give the cookie cutter answers, but to actually have like full stories prepared. I mean, I like to treat an interview like it's a conversation. So you go in there and you're actually like having a nice conversation with whoever it is you're interviewing for. And if you look at it like that, like you're just going over to your friend's house and talking about your past job careers and I don't know, what you studied and what you do on the side. If you treat it like that, you're just going to be so much more comfortable, and it's going to come out so much more naturally, rather than if you're tense and you're trying to say the right thing. And another thing I would say would be, there's no one interview that should be like it's do or die. If I don't get this, my career's over. Because there's literally so many jobs out there, so many jobs that you probably don't even know about yet. When I got into my first job at Covidian, I mean, I knew I liked communications and all that kind of stuff, but I think I started like looking around. It's a big company now, and I started taking notice to jobs that I didn't even know existed. You would never even learn about in college. And I started saying, oh my gosh, I want to go towards this, I want to try this, oh, I want to try this. And it's just, there's no one job that this is it. Like if I don't get this job, it's it. So there's so much out there, and you should treat each job as just a conversation, you know, telling them what you're about. It's almost like you're interviewing them too. Think about it like, please don't be like so needy, like please hire me, please hire me. Almost be like, I want to see what you're about. What's it like to work here? I always ask, like, what's the culture like? And almost kind of have this demeanor like, I don't know if I even want to work here. Tell me more about it. It's like you're interviewing them, turn it around. And if you treat it like that, it's actually, you won't really have much trouble with interviews at all. So that's my input.
I'll take a stab at it as well. I guess one thing that I would say is that, you know, it's all right when you're asked a question to not know the answer, especially in an interview. I don't think that, even to admit that you don't know the answer, because you may encounter questions, or I certainly have, where the answer is not so important as sort of the thought process that goes into it. Sometimes you'll be asked about, you know, how you might approach a certain reporting problem or some other concern or issue on the job, and some of it will require knowledge that you don't have or can't have because you don't have the job. But if you can think about deconstructing that and how you might approach the problem, and tell them that you're going to walk them through the steps that you might take to approach that, because that might actually be the right answer, is to say, well, if I encounter the situation, the first thing I would do is talk to my supervisor and see what he or she thinks, or I would check with my coworkers and see if we have a policy or procedure about this. And then the other advice I would have for you is to, you know, occasionally you take questions, you know, when you receive a question and you answer the question that you wish you were asked. Sort of like I just did a little bit. I'm kind of changing around. And so I'm just going to go on and just add one other thought here, because the I don't know thing is something that maybe you all are experiencing now here at Tunxis. I know in my time at Tunxis, I was never sure what I was going to do next. I mentioned a little bit before, but I don't have to know just yet. But as long as I know that this is part of the process, and there's no, for me at least, I don't feel like there's a finish line. I don't feel like I'm done learning. I don't feel like I'm done. I'm probably done with school, but I don't think I'm done learning, or done sort of advancing in my career, or bettering myself. There's always something else to kind of strive for. So be comfortable with not knowing.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that you should, it's really hard to just say, oh, just be yourself and be comfortable and have a conversation. But I do totally agree with those things. Because I think that if you're showing up and being yourself, you'll decide whether you want to work there, or I mean, the other thing too is you could present yourself as someone who is taking on this job. Maybe it's something that you don't really want, but like you kind of need to get a job, and so it's like a first stepping stone sort of thing until you can find something better. And I totally get that. We all kind of have to do that sometimes. So I think if you just present yourself as you are and not try to be someone that you aren't, I mean, I think that people will see how genuine I'm, like totally like, but I think it's just really important to be genuine in who you are. I mean, I was saying to Beau earlier, like what was I doing showing up in sequins and a pink tulle skirt today? But that's just who I am, and I really believe in being who you are and having those personal passion projects, and even if that means like you're a little bit quirky and you don't really fit inside the company culture, it's definitely as much, like you said, finding out if you even want to be there. And also remember that the people on the other side of the table, or on the other side of the phone, or on the other side of the computer, if you're doing like a Skype interview, are people too. And you can relate to them as a person and share, personal stories, or ask them about their children if you notice they have photos of kids or something like that, So just remember that, yes, even though it's scary because they're in a position of power potentially, they're people too. And I think if you remember that and just sort of try to relax. Another tip, I'm really comfortable speaking in public and talking to people that I don't know, so it's not really something that I ever had to worry about, but I have a lot of friends who aren't. And so I would tell them to be interviewed by like their friend's parents, or someone that they don't really know but seems to be in a position of power, because then, it's not exactly the interview, but you're talking to someone you don't really know about, yourself. And it can also be really weird talking about yourself and your accomplishments and things that you've done and things that you're proud of. But be proud of the things that you have done, and find ways to stand out from the hundreds, thousands maybe of other applicants that they have. So if practicing with a friend or a professor might help you, then I would suggest doing something like that too.
I would say the biggest things that companies looking to hire for right now when you step into an interview is confidence and experience. But those two things vary in what they actually mean. Experience doesn't have to be you did this exact same job somewhere else, but can you articulate how you can relate something you've done in the past to that? And especially more and more what I'm seeing, especially on the corporate side, is the way in which these companies tend to interview is they want you to answer a series of example-based questions. Like, give me an example of how you would handle a customer interaction doing A to Z, or what have you. You don't necessarily have to have done that job before, but if you've done something, going back to the extracurricular lecture I was giving you guys before, or just intern, anything that you can possibly relate to in that interview scenario where you're just thinking quickly, that gives you a head up against the other person that just doesn't know how to answer that. And the confidence is going to build from that too, just from the past experience you have, other than just sitting in a classroom and going home, playing video games, whatever, and then going home and going to class. But I would definitely just try to get yourself as much experience doing as many things as possible. This is the time to do it.
Okay.
I actually just want to say one more thing.
Go ahead.
One thing that you kind of brought up is, how you don't have to have all the experience. And I noticed in looking for jobs, there are so many times where I will look at a job description and go, well, I almost fit that, but I don't have 5+ years experience in whatever. So don't get discouraged by that, because a lot of times, companies will just put kind of like, needs 5+ years here and a master's degree in this, and like all of these things where maybe like that's their kind of perfect ideal candidate. But if you fit like 70% of that, maybe you have 3 years of experience, or you have a bachelor's degree or something where you feel you can always learn on the job. And a lot of times you're going to be doing that anyway. So don't be discouraged when you see something like that. If the job description is pretty close to who you are or the experience that you have, apply to it anyway. Worst case scenario, you just don't get a call back, but at least you've kind of put your name out there more times.
I think that's great advice. Okay, I'm trying out a new mic. All right, so another question. I think,
Okay, so I'm just gonna talk loudly because I think I just have a jinxie thing going on with my thing. So one other question I thought of is there anything about when you first started working full-time that surprised you? Either about the life of working in your first career, about something that happened on the job, or anything that just kind of surprised you?
I think for me, it was just the environment and the culture of a big company. This is going to differ depending on your experience. Smaller companies are way different than bigger companies, but a lot of the bigger companies, the Fortune 500 companies, they have very, very strict procedures as far as what you can say, what you can ask people, just what you can say in like normal conversation with your coworkers. To me, I was just, I was very surprised by that. So you kind of start learning like, it's not acceptable to ask this or say this. I can't think of any particular examples, but maybe salary is one. Like, my part-time jobs throughout high school and college, you could say to your friend, oh, how much do you make? How much do you make? It's just very natural conversation. But when you get to those bigger jobs, it's frowned upon. You can't say to your coworker, how much you making? Can't say that. You'll be reported to human resources and probably disciplined for it. So just to me, it was just the culture shock of a bigger company. And I think many of the rules apply to smaller companies, but for the bigger companies, they're very strict with a lot of that.
Nothing really, Chris? How about you? Anything, Chris, something that surprised you?
I would say, and this probably varies depending on where you work, depending on what kind of turnover they have, but we are in the position right now, and with you guys coming out of school, to take on a full-time job soon, where it's very unique because there's actually about 3 different generations of people in the workforce right now. You go from people in the baby boomer generation to Generation Y or X, that was right before the millennials, and then millennials. So you've got 3 very different mindsets, like people that are raised in the 80s, people that are raised in the 60s or 70s, and then people that are raised in the 90s and 2000s. So you just kind of have to, going back to what Chandler said a little bit, you have to keep in mind that things you say might not be taken the same way in a different person's mindset that grew up about 20, 30 years before you, and is still working their way through your time. So,
Yeah,
hopefully
just
it'll be better soon, and they'll retire more. There'll be more time.
Exactly. Yeah, just to add to that, like the generation gap, that's a very important topic, because especially with, like he said, the older people, the older generation, there was a certain management style it's not nearly the same as it was back then. A boss today, you're not going to see a boss like the old stereotypical boss who will yell at his employees or discipline them in that kind of way. You can't do that anymore. So, but what you'll find is a lot of the older employees, but I experienced this at Medtronic. A lot of the employees and the bosses and the managers who had been there for 30+ years, they still had that old school style of management where they would, they put down employees in front of everyone else as a way of discipline. When now, we actually have like psychology catching up with the research and showing that that's not effective. That the most effective aspect of being a leader is approaching it totally different than that. But a lot of the older employees are not up to date on that, and they're very set in their ways. So that's definitely something to just be mindful of going into positions where you're working with the older generation.
actually found. Funny enough, I actually found that working in a big corporation or even a small, I've worked in both. I mean, I've worked for kind of a big company and a tiny, basically startup. And I found that it is kind of a lot like high school. You still have to deal with a lot of crazy personalities, and some people are going to be mad at other people and don't want to talk to like this person, and you get caught in the middle of it. And so I guess people just never really grow up sometimes. But so I think you're dealing with kind of a lot of the same sort of personality stuff on top of, you know, having to have like a layer of professionalism about your, you know, your interactions with the people that you see every day, because there are definitely going to be people that you don't get along with, and then there are going to be people that maybe become your best friends, and so I guess like just be mindful that no matter where you are, you're going to have to deal with crazy personalities, and I'm sorry that, but that's just the truth.
You have to keep mind of what you're saying and sometimes filter things out a little bit.
Yeah,
even when there are
definitely.
other crazy personalities, right?
Yep.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is open it up to questions to you guys. Does anybody have a question? Anybody got a question? Yeah, what's your question?
One for Chandler. You mentioned early on that you found a lot of motivation through some particular books. What specific books can you recommend?
I could recommend many, but the one that changed my whole outlook on life is called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it, but if you haven't read it, it's not even a long book, but go out to Barnes & Noble, get it, read the whole thing. I read the whole thing in like a day, and it just totally changes your mindset on how you approach money, how you approach just how you think about things, how you approach other people. It really can be life-changing. So yeah, that's a good one. Another one is what is it? The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle was a good one. If you're on like the spiritual side of things, and just any by Napoleon Hill. Dale Carnegie was good. If any of you are communication majors, Dale Carnegie writes some very good content about public speaking, on just dealing with people in the workplace and how to effectively just get people to be drawn to you more. So Dale Carnegie, Napoleon Hill are two of my favorite authors. I'll definitely recommend their books. Yeah.
And I don't have a microphone to bring to you, so I'll just try to. Who's got questions? Okay, yeah. Do you want to stand up a bit and then try to use your?
I took public speaking.
Good. Good.
How's it going, guys? My name's Dan. I'm president of the Tunxis Sun newspaper here. And my question is, with the recent budget cuts facing all the schools in Connecticut, we've seen community colleges fall under the stigma that we don't matter. And they seem to get hit most on these budget cuts. And I know Ryan, you touched on it a little bit. But can you guys kind of talk about your time at Tunxis and how that gave you a start to your careers? Because you all seem very successful, and I believe that Tunxis played a role in that. So if you can touch on that role, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure, thank you. Dan, right?
Yeah.
Dan, thanks for your question. So I guess one part of that I'm not sure how to talk about, because I work at the state, and yeah, so so this has a personal sort of cloud hanging over my head every day. However, this happens all the time. This is not the first time that Tunxis and other community colleges in the system have, experienced cuts, real or looming, as part of the system. But when I was a student here, I helped organize people with student government to actually go, and several students and I sat at an appropriations committee hearing in Hartford at the legislative office building, and sat at a microphone very much like this, though none of them are haunted, and gave 3 minutes of testimony that we also had to submit in writing. And I don't know, or don't recall specifically the impact that our testimony had, but I know that having a group from Tunxis all wearing Tunxis Community College shirts and sweatshirts there. I don't know if we were on CTN either, but we positioned ourselves. We got there early enough. We all lined up matching there, so we'd be on CTN in case anybody's ever watching. And I think that it does matter, I think, to participate. I know that advocacy can work. I know at the state legislators, elected officials, they're all making tough decisions, and the easiest way to lose funding is to not speak up and to not be heard, because I think that the programs and anything that they're considering not continuing funding for that they don't hear about, I think that it makes it very easy for them to move those dollars around on the page so that they're no longer there. So I would say if there are any students that are interested in advocacy, I would encourage you to consider advocating. Talk about your own personal experience at Tunxis, how it's helping you currently, how you expect it to help you in the future, how investing in students here and throughout the community college system is an investment in the future of Connecticut. I can't say there's no, but there's probably the smallest amount of brain drain from community colleges, because people live and work and go to school. These are people who live in Connecticut and have their roots in Connecticut. I would say that most of the people who graduate from community colleges in the state stay in the state, is what I'm saying. Whereas people who graduate from Wesleyan University, where I went to school, now live in Brooklyn. Though I live locally. And so, I think there's an important case to be made, and that is, of course, in case it wasn't clear, me speaking as a person and an alum of Tunxis Community College, and not as an employee of the state of Connecticut Department of Housing.
All right.
So there's that.
Well, and we just had a group of students go to the, didn't we just have a group of students make that trip into Hartford to kind of voice Tunxis concerns? Yeah?
It's on the 19th.
Oh, it's on the 19th, it's coming up.
There are two.
There was one, and then there's another one coming up. So we are trying to do that. Our professors have organized that so that Tunxis gets heard. Good, but very good point. Anybody else got a question? Yeah?
I'm just wondering if you can give, or any of you can give advice for like atypical students who are also juggling, work, kids, life, households, just advice to people who have to run their lives too and still go to school.
Well, I think especially for community college students, I think it's a fact that most students in community colleges are also working, either part-time or full-time. I know when I was in community college, I was working at least part-time, probably like 30 hours a week, and all my friends who were going to four-year schools, they weren't working. They were just partying and having a blast. So I think, community college students, for the most part, do have it more difficult. My advice would be to just, the most important thing I could say, and this worked for me, is to have it like a vision, to have like that ending like image of where you're going, what you're moving towards. I think a lot of students who come in here at first don't really know what they want to do. That may be a reason why a lot of students come to community college. That's why I did. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And that almost works against you, because if you don't have an image or a vision of what you want to do or where you want to go, it's going to be kind of difficult to just do all this work, to do math classes and science classes and everything like that, because you're thinking in the back of your mind, what is this for? Like, what is this going to do for me? This is just like high school. That's what I was thinking. So I think once you have an idea of what you want to do, a very clear image, and you just concentrate on that and say, okay, like I want to be a teacher, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, whatever it is. And then you could use that as getting your drive from it. So with me, I knew I wanted to get into communications, whether it be like a coach or, well, I'm an engineer right now, but I'm working up to being a corporate coach. So having that in my mind, that to me was giving me the motivation to do all the work, because I knew that's where it was getting me. So yeah, I was still working. I didn't have financial aid anymore at this point, because I was kicked off of it because my grades were so horrible at first. So yeah, it's going to be very difficult. I know a lot of you probably have kids too, which makes it even more difficult. But I think as long as you know you're doing it for a reason, that it's actually for something, that's what's going to give you the drive. So my advice would be to just keep reminding yourself of why you're doing this. Because long term, 10 years down the road, you're going to look back and say, I'm so glad I did it. So.
I
Can I
don't.
add something to it?
Go ahead.
real quick? So just, and with sort of a question to my panelists, I think, I mean, do any of you guys think you would be where you are in life if you hadn't gone to Tunxis? Us up here? No, not me. Maybe not Anuj, I don't know. And another thing that, you know, we lost Anuj, I think, right before it started, and I think that he's maybe the best qualified person to talk about juggling all these competing things. I have young kids as well, but I didn't while I was in school. But Anuj just showed us, I mean, kids come first, and stuff happens, things come up, and you got to roll with it, and it's okay to stop off or take a semester off and come back. I mean, Tunxis isn't going away; it's always going to be here. So, you know, if things don't work out one semester, you get a fresh start. I'm not sure how fresh it actually can be, depending on grades and withdrawals and all that stuff. But a fresh start asterisk, you can start over, you can come back if life happens. In the meantime, you can take a longer time. Tunxis can be very flexible, I think.
And I just wanted to, I don't know the exact statistic, but one of the things that we've learned is that when students are juggling a lot, and it makes you tough and it makes you strong, and the students that transfer to 4 years, they're more likely to graduate than students that start at the 4 years. And that's because those students that go on and transfer, they go on and succeed because they're tough, because they know that juggling act and they do it, and they know how to put their nose to the grindstone, and they haven't been partying. So if you can juggle that act here, you're more likely to go out and finish that and get that degree. Okay, who else has a question? Yep, okay.
One, it would be great to hear your comment, Ryan, on the budget question. And Dave, and I do have another question for each of you. Do you feel that if the associate's degree was enough, what would life have been had you just left it at the Tunxis degree and not gone on to college?
That's a great question, because it's one that I always had before I got my associate's degree. So the question is an associate's degree enough to make it today? And of course, that largely depends on what you want to do. I know a lot of jobs only require an associate's degree to be fine. But I'd say most jobs, the majority of jobs today, require a bachelor's degree. And I learned that firsthand when I got into a big company like Covidian, and I started off just as a manufacturing technician, low-level job, and I saw many people who had worked their way up to like team leaders in manufacturing. They had been there for probably like 20, some over maybe 25 years. They had so much experience. They were more knowledgeable than probably any of the managers, and they could not be promoted to a supervisor position, one up, because they didn't have a bachelor's degree. And that doesn't seem fair to me. That didn't seem fair at all, because it never used to be like that. If you talk to most of your parents, they'll tell you you didn't need a degree to advance. It was just based on experience. But like it or not, the fact today is that you need a 4-year degree to even be considered for a lot of these positions. But again, it depends on what you want to do. I mean, of course, there's many positions out there that don't require. A lot of the small companies don't. But I'd say I'd recommend get your associates and think to yourself, I've come this far. I've already spent 2 years, or however long it took you, maybe it was 5, working so hard and achieving something this great. Why not go an extra 2 years? Why not just go an extra 2 years and get a bachelor's degree? Because it's going to benefit you so much, like tremendously in the future. So I'd say overall, definitely go for your bachelor's degree, because for the most part, you're going to need it. But again, it would depend on the job.
For me, an associate's was not enough.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing.
Me on the spot. No, I would echo a lot of what Carson just said, or sorry, what Chandler just said. Obviously, it matters what career field you're in. But one of the things you'll find, I mean, the funnest part was leaving Tunxis. I mean, just because I knew with what I wanted to do in political science. There's some good classes here with Professor Piero, which pointed him out, everybody laughed, but no. But there was a lot more variety in classes in that field that I could take once I moved on. So that was more of the light at the end of the tunnel for me. It was getting to that 4-year college and start to be able to take more specialized classes, things like that. Obviously, if you're doing a more technical job, you may not need to go that far. So, it's just gonna vary by case. To the budget question, I was gonna say, Patrice, before, you have students going up to testify before the committee on the 19th. Have you guys circled out and communicated with the other community colleges and other state colleges? Okay. Because that's actually huge, the solidarity of everybody from the CSU system getting in there and talking about it. As far as funds getting cut from these colleges in the state system at the legislature, everybody, it's pretty well known now how important the state system is, just because more and more people utilize the community colleges as either a gateway into a four-year degree or just to get what they need to get a step up in their job and have a career field with associates even. So I think that the legislature knows that. Reminders definitely always help, but I mean, the overlying problem is Connecticut's budget problem as a whole. So until that gets fixed, you're gonna have to keep that going to bat for the CSU system. I mean, hopefully, if you're from Southington, Waterbury, Prospect, or Measure Wolcott, you can get me in there, and I can start making some pathways to that. But that problem's not going away anytime soon until we fix the revenue system coming into the state legislature. So hopefully that does get fixed. I do know a lot of legislatures do have a priority on our higher education system, so I don't see anything drastic ever happening, but it's always good to make sure they see a face and connect it to what they might be cutting.
Are there any other questions? Yeah, Karen.
My question is, many of our students, like yourselves, will be transferring to a four-year university. Can you speak to the experience you had moving from the small environment of Tunxis to the larger environment of, say, the University of Connecticut or more elite four-year like Wesleyan?
Yeah, I'll start. I, to be honest, felt a little shell-shocked. So when I graduated high school, like I said, I went to CCSU initially, and I think I was not like mentally prepared for that. And I had also really wanted to take a year off anyway. So I backtracked a little bit, and then when I came to Tunxis, I found such a nurturing environment. And I think a lot of that had to do with the professors that I had, including Patrice. And then kind of going from this to UConn, and I should also say I didn't live on campus. I was a commuter student, so I think that had a lot to do with it as well. I would pretty much just drive to school, go to class, and then go home, which sometimes I regret because I'm like, oh, I really wish that I had had that kind of college experience where I lived on campus, but my wallet does not regret that. So, it was definitely a bit of a shock. I actually went up to UConn every semester before my classes. So I was actually at the Stores campus, and I would go up like the weekend before to figure out where all of the buildings were and figure out where I would have to park, because I always had to park in like the horse barns, super far from everything, and I would have to walk like a mile to get to my class. So that's kind of what I did, and then I also think just like trying to find, if you're not living on campus and you're a commuter like me, trying to find some people who maybe are on campus, and like making some of those connections that can kind of help you get over that shell shock a little bit, because they are much larger classes and that can be really intimidating, and you can feel lost, so either making a connection with other people in your classes, or making a connection with the professor and actually like being a little bit more proactive about it, I think will help a lot.
One thing I just wanted to add real quick, and I remember this when it was my first year at Tunxis. I can't remember the class, but they had alumni from Tunxis come in who had gone to get their master's degree, I think, 2 of them PhDs. And they said something that I'll never forget. They said, once you get out of Tunxis and you start your bachelor's degree, it's so much easier than your associate's degree. They said your bachelor's degree, your master's degree, it's actually easier than your associate's degree. And I found there's so much truth to that, because when you're going for your associate's degree, you're usually taking a lot of the courses that don't interest you. With me, it was math, science, things like that. I just couldn't take it, and a lot of the times I just couldn't get past those classes. But once you get to your bachelor's degree and your master's or whatever else you're doing, you're actually going because you want to go, and you're taking these classes that actually interest you. and is actually like sparking, passion in you. So that's what makes it easy. So, I mean, that really resonated with me. So I definitely, if you take nothing else from this, know that once you get your associate's degree, once you leave Tunxis, your bachelor's degree is actually in many ways much easier. So
add a little bit more. So I graduated with the general studies and transferred to Wesleyan, and I never would have applied to Wesleyan or Trinity. That was not at all on my radar. I thought for sure there's no way I can afford this, and I was wrong. There is actually a lot of financial aid available for students. I got some specific scholarships that had nothing to do with me except the fact that I was a student from a Connecticut community college. They have a lot of ways certainly at Wesleyan and at Trinity, the financial aid package that they offered me would have made it, actually did make it less expensive than it would have cost me to go to Central. So if any of you are thinking about these schools and interested in applying to them and are thinking that you maybe can't afford them, I would say don't let that scare you away from it at all, because really the sticker price, and you've probably heard this elsewhere, but it's not what most people end up actually paying. And then the other thing is that I experienced actually the opposite of what you said. I thought that going out of those next 2 years was a lot harder, certainly for me, and I think though part of it was kind of a culture shock that was sort of self-imposed. I almost felt at first that I didn't belong there. I felt like I was a fish out of water, that I really started to miss Tunxis right after I left quite a lot, until I realized, and this is something that I had to do for myself, but just to realize that I belonged there. They didn't let me in to be nice to me. They didn't let me in because, they let me in because I worked hard at Tunxis and proved that I could do it and proved that I belonged there. And it didn't matter actually where I went to from here, but I ended up where I belonged, for me personally. And I deserved to be there, and I earned my spot at Wesleyan just as anyone who entered there as a freshman. But I also, I missed the sort of full college experience. I commuted and didn't live in the dorms there. So if you want the full college experience, you should get it, because there's no going back. If you don't get a chance to live in a dorm after you transfer, then you probably will never get to. So.
Anything else to add, or is that helpful? Or?
No, I'm done. Sorry, that was a weird way to end it, but yeah.
I would I would say I thought it was actually a lot easier when I went to Central from here, and I think it says a lot about the liberal arts section that is at Tunxis and humanities, because I was well prepared once I got to Central. It was I thought it was actually easier and less homework. So I kind of equated this, and I in my head I kind of reasoned it being that when you're going to community college, a lot of times there might be older people going back to school too, so they're kind of building those fundamentals for you again. So I think that's some of the reason why I might have felt it was a lot easier going to Central. But again, echoing what Chandler said this time, it is you're done with your general studies. You're probably done with Comp 1, Comp 2, so no more of that, no more algebra, unless you're going for math. And you're just focusing on what your major and potentially minor are as well. So it's way better, and that's probably when you can get more into to networking and finding out where you want to go from school as well.
Are there any other questions? Anybody else have a question they'd like to ask? Okay, go ahead.
How many classes were you taking when you came to Tunxis compared to the classes that you took when you went on to 4 years?
So when I was at Tunxis, I was actually taking 4 to 5 at a time, and I was working too. So at first that didn't go too well for me because I ended up dropping out, but when I returned I was doing the same thing, working about 30 hours a week and taking 4 to 5 classes. Once I started at CCSU, I was only going part-time. I was taking about 2 to 3 classes at a time, usually 2. And that's just because I was working during the day full-time, and I couldn't fit any more in. I'd say if you're gonna plan on working full-time and also take classes, I'd say 2 to 3, depending on what they are. Because if you're taking like a really 2 or 3 very difficult classes, you might have a hard time. But with me, I found, I did 3, actually my last semester when I was just completing my bachelor's degree, I did 3, and that was actually really stressful for me while working full-time. So I'd probably recommend 2 if I had to, but you could, I mean, depending on the class, you might be able to do 3. I know people who've done 5. I don't know how they do that, but yeah.
I did full-time, mostly 4 to 5 classes a semester. Took advantage of some online classes to make stuff work with my work schedule, and worked part-time at the time. I think I took a winter session or summer session class. So I would say if you want to balance your workload out, definitely take advantage of those short session classes and online classes to make your schedule work.
I think I did 3 and 4 classes every semester while I was at Tunxis, and then when I was at UConn I did 4 classes. And I did the same thing as Beau. I would do 1 or 2 classes during the summer because I just really wanted to finish my degree at that point. And I was also working either full or part-time throughout the whole thing. So it's definitely really hard, and I would say as much as like it would suck for you to push out your own personal deadline of graduation, don't stress yourself out by taking on way too much. If you have to take 1 less class and that means that it's going to take you an extra semester to graduate, that happened to me. I ended up graduating for the fall winter semester at UConn because I just couldn't take on too much. So just do as much as you can, and don't feel bad about taking less classes if you need to.
I think I was all over the place. At one point I was taking 2 classes, at one point I was taking 5, 3, I don't even remember. But one thing I wanted to add to that too is, if you do ever take an internship, wait till your senior year to do it before you're about to graduate. I took mine in my junior year. It might cost me a job, but it definitely is a nice thing to get into. Right before you graduate.
I was gonna do it.
Just to get that done right before you, right as you're about to graduate, that way you can get that one cup open.
Alec was nowhere near there, so I don't know what. All right, did you have one final question? We'll give you the last word, Raphael.
My experience with my students, I see a lot of them come here. I don't know how prepared they are necessarily to be in college, but I get the sense that a lot of them would rather be doing something else when they come to school, merely because there's a lot of societal pressure on them. Just taking my class. So my question is, looking back on your experiences, would you advise students who are just getting out of high school to maybe take a year or 2 off, find themselves, gain some life experiences, and then check into community college, and when they're better prepared, maybe they know what they're more passionate about?
No.
It's not.
I would, absolutely. Respectfully, I disagree. No, I mean, I think it really depends on the person, obviously, but I was always someone who wanted to go to college. But when I discovered that I was not going to be able to pursue my dream and move out to California and become a successful actress, and that all crashed and burned, I had 0 motivation. And so when even going to Central and pursuing a theater degree, which is pretty close to what I wanted to do, just didn't hold my attention. And I really, really wanted to take that year off. And my dad forced me to go to CCSU. I hated it and totally resented him for it, and didn't really care about my studies, and therefore wasted a lot of money doing that. So I ultimately did end up taking a year off. And in that year, like I said earlier, I kind of was like, oh my God, I need to be back in school, and I had that realization. So I think that if you force yourself or are forced by others to go to school when you're really not into it, you're going to waste your time, you're going to waste your professor's time, you're going to waste money probably. So I would say if you can, and you know yourself, and you can take a year or a semester off to just sort of figure out, reset yourself and just kind of be done with high school, and then go back to school, then yeah, I would do that. I think that it's really a personal choice.
So my answer is sort of in between. It's definitely not no, but it's definitely not yes. I think Sami mentioned that it's a very personal thing. I mean, I was 5 years out of high school before I went back to school full time, and that first semester was the hardest adjustment in my life to that point. It's hard to go back. I think that's the challenge, and that's the risk of not going straight to college after high school. Is it can be a challenge to go back. Being a student, requires a different level of focus, a different sort of different time management skills. You're not necessarily off when you're not on campus. You still have assignments that are due and things you could be working on. Reading you could do, should do, I should say. Reading you should do. Definitely do the reading. Put in a plug for the reading. Oh God. Save me. Anyway, yeah. So taking time off is something that people should consider. Shouldn't look down on it. I think it's what motivated me to sort of power through once I did get back and start full time. I think that returning after time away made me more motivated, even though, as I said before, I didn't know where I was going to end up at the end of it. I knew that this is something that I wanted to do for myself and that I needed to do for myself, and it made me more committed to it rather than something that I felt kind of forced into. So, but just cautiously consider taking a long spell of time off.
Okay, we're gonna have to end it there because some of our students need to go to another class, but could we give a round of applause?